everyone, and welcome to Spamhaus's webinar, Blocklist Refresh. My name's Sarah, and I'm delighted to have the pleasure of introducing you to Manuel and Carol.
Hi.
Hi, everyone.
So, just as an introduction, Manuel is otherwise known within the industry as Skull. And he's been working with email infrastructure and particularly the security aspect of email, well, probably for more years than he might care to admit. And then we have Carol, and Carol's certainly part of the fabric of the Spamhaus project. He spends most of his time investigating how a bad actor's infrastructure operates and obviously ensures internet users are protected from their nefarious activities. He particularly focuses on reputation and reputation across all internet resources. He's very much into reviewing any and all data that helps provide context and obviously ultimately protection. Now, just before I hand over to Skull and Carol, I'd like to mention that we will be having some Q&A time at the end of this webinar. You know, this is a place for you guys to be able to ask questions. We certainly say there's no such thing as a dumb question. I've opened up the Zoom Q&A window, so feel free to put your questions in there as and when you think of them, but it will be at the end that we get round to answering them. And now I'll hand you over to Carol.
Thank you, Sarah. So, short introduction of what we'll do today. We'll talk a little bit about what we name the things that we usually talk about because there's some confusion around it, just to make sure that we're all on the same page. We'll look into what actually is a DNS block list. We'll look into how we compile the list that we create, what policies around those data sets exist and how we come to those. And then we'll finalize it with looking at how to use the various data sets that are out there and what kind of data sets that are out there. So the first part is what's in the name. So the things we talk about are, you know, some people call them block lists, some people call them real-time black hole lists, some people call them DNSBL, some people call them yet something else. In the end, we're all talking about the same thing here. So no matter what name you use, usually it refers to the same thing. And when we talk about these things, we usually, it's all the same. It's a data set that is in the end used in a DNS way. DNS is basically the method of accessing this data set. There are other ways you can use the same data. We also offer the same data over a HTTP API endpoint. But usually, especially in an email environment, the traditional way of accessing this data is through doing a DNS query against either our servers or a local copy of the same data. And so yeah, in the end, all these terms apply. And but to keep it consistent, we'll either talk about DNSBL or block list. But if you're more familiar with one of the other terms that I mentioned, then yeah, we're on the same page here. And for an explanation of what a DNSBL actually is, I'll hand it over to Skull.
Thanks. And yes, as Carol said, the term DNSBL itself, it's actually composed of two parts. So DNS is just the way of querying it, and we'll see in a second why that is the case. And the BL part is just representing the block list component, where the block list is just a database of stuff that you probably don't want to receive or you want to block. And for some definition of block, of course. So if it's just a database, why DNS is in the way of it? Well, as Carol said, it may be or it may be not. I mean, we do provide the same data through DNSBL as an access method. But we also provide the same data through other means that can be consumed without having DNS at all in the path. For example, through an HTTP interface that can be queried. The usage of DNS as the media for these queries has its own advantages. And that is the reason why it has been popular and supported by mail servers, specifically for 2 decades by now. First of all, it is firewall friendly. And what I mean by firewall friendly is that you don't need to open any specific firewall port to consume it, say, from your mail server, assuming your mail server is, of course, standing behind a firewall. And the reason for that is that it is just a normal DNS query. Since your mail server certainly needs to resolve internet resources, like mapping a host name back to an IP and the other way around, of course, it is already capable of running DNS queries. And that means that that is already enough to consume the data without having to worry about policies and stuff. The second part is that DNS provides caching as part of the protocol. And that means that you don't need to worry about doing too many queries about the same thing and stuff like that, because again, DNS takes part of caching the result of the initial query and keep it in the cache for you to consume for an unlimited amount of, well, unlimited number of times over a certain amount of time that we decide. So that is part of the protocol, and yet again, another thing you don't need to care about. The third one is redundancy. DNS is already redundant at the protocol level. If your resolver cannot reach one of the authoritative servers for the DNSBL in this case, it will automatically demote that endpoint and try another one so that you still get your answer. So again, this is something that you don't need to care about, like configuring and managing redundancy at the client level, because the DNS protocol already cares of it. And finally, compared to other access methods that may be available, DNS is mostly leveraging over UDP. And UDP being connectionless means that the latency is already at the lowest level possible for your queries. So for all these reasons, this access method has been implemented, again, probably more than 2 decades ago, I think at this point, and it's still there. Of course, right now, many of the constraints that brought that media to be the selected one are no longer that compelling as they were in the past. So again, we have other methods to access the data, but that still has its role for sure, particularly in the mail server. Now, since it is a DNS query, it means that you are not limited. The only limit you have in what you query through that interface is the amount of data that you can put into a DNS query. And of course, there are limits. Sometimes those limits are quite small in terms of bandwidth available. But when you're looking up stuff like IP and domains and other things that we'll see later that have a fixed length, that have a length that is short enough to actually fit the DNS query, it's still a viable way to consume this data. Finally, let me say just one small thing about the definition of block list. As a matter of fact, what a DNSBL does, what all DNSBLs do, is just receive a query and reply with a numeric code representing the answer. Of course, the meaning of that numeric code depends on which list you are querying and what are the policies that define that very list. And as a result of that, you can build up DNSBLs about any number of factors or of aspects. If you want to build up a DNSBL list all the IP addresses finishing with 7, you can do that. Of course, they don't necessarily make much sense to block email, but it is technically doable. So the point is, what the DNSBL provides is just an answer to a question. Is this a compromised machine? Yes, no. Then you take action. But what action you decide, whether you decide to reject the communication, whether you decide to tag the message or anything else, is entirely under the control of whoever is doing the query, not by us. So you decide how to apply the lists to your traffic and what to do with it, based sometimes on our suggestions, and that is part of the reasons why we're here, but it is entirely under your control. So running a block list, as we said, is basically about collecting a huge chunk of data in our case, deciding how you're going to build your lists, that is the policy part, and then finally build them. So let's move with Carl to speak about how we collect the data first and what we do with it.
Thanks, Cole. So often when I talk to people, they say, okay, you know, oh, I'm on the list because I hit a spam trap. Well, that may be a part of what's going on, but there's so much more to it. Of course, we have our own in-house spam traps, honeypots of various types and sorts, but there's so much more that goes into the data that we publish. We have a team of our own researchers. We work with all sorts of independent researchers. There are many data that gets contributed by companies we work with, both ISPs, ESPs, anyone sort of operating the email ecosystem. We work with law enforcement. We work a lot with registries and registrars to get all sorts of domain-related data. And finally, there's a lot of cooperation with internet governing bodies or internet working groups like MOG, for example. And so we get all little bits of data everywhere, and then comes in the part of the processing. Just the fact that, for example, the first thing I started off with, the fact that you hit a spam trap doesn't mean that that email is actually spam, and that doesn't mean that that IP needs to be on a blacklist. It could be the case in a whole bunch of scenarios, but that's not always the case. So there's a lot of logic and data that follows all these events, and that sort of massaging of the data to create data sets that we publish. That's a very important part of the process, where there's a lot of methodology, a lot of data, a lot of knowledge of people, and that we've gained over time that goes into that to create the data sets that we publish. And it's some of the processes are fairly complicated, but the end result is what we believe are reliable data sets to do certain things with. And we really try to distill all those different inputs and all those different views into one easy to use data set that can be applied in as many situations as possible. So when we talk about the data, the big data that goes into this, it's always good to give a little bit of insight in that. So I'll turn it back to Skull for that.
Yeah, mostly to speak a little bit about the numbers of stuff we process on a daily basis. Of course, these numbers do change quite a lot over time. This was the numbers we collected like 2 weeks ago when we built the deck for this presentation. But I would say that nowadays we're still at the same numbers. The reason why they change is the fact that, of course, there is added capacity on our side to do more stuff. So we ingest more data. We also find and create new deals with third parties that adds to our capacity to get the data. But there are also things that we at some point we decide to do as in the form of other types of analysis, and that of course increments the amount of checks that we do over the stuff. So You can see on the slide that what we do daily is process the reputation of maybe 3 million domains per day. We do process SMTP connection data. The number there, again, comes from last week average. On a daily basis, it means that during the busy hours, we are processing something like 150,000 connection data per second. That is a lot of stuff, and a lot of intel can be built even on the that type of data, that in most cases is just connection data, meaning that we know who speak with whom, but the entire communication is entirely anonymized. A portion of that, a few thousands of messages per second, are actually messages that we receive on our own spam traps, or spam traps that we control in any way, and that of course builds a lot in our view of what goes on the spam front. Of course, what we do, however, is not necessarily limited to email and spam. For example, you can see in the second line of this slide that we do process something like 18,000 malware samples per day. Well, why we do that? Well, what we do is just process these malware samples through static and dynamic binary analysis. And the reason why we do that is that we get the list of botnet command and control servers and distribution points for malware downloaders and stuff like that from processing that. And that means that we cannot rely only on email and spam to build what we build. We also run and process traffic from our own botnet sinkholes. We do run our own multi-protocol honeypots, including but not limited to IoT type of compromise. We do run our own passive DNS data connection and active DNS data connection. And the reason why we do that is that, of course, before assessing the reputation of something like a domain, you need to know that a domain exists, and you don't want to wait until it's being used in spam in order to do that. So that is how we do collect the data. But of course, the next thing to do is decide how we are going to assess a reputation for those things, and build a policy about how you're going to use that to compose a list. Carl.
Yeah, so as much as the data that's in the list is important, the policy that governs what kind of data gets put into a list I think is equally important. The policies that define a list will govern what we can put in a list and what not, and for a user, what to expect when you start using a certain data set, what kind of things would be in there. It's not just let's throw everything on one big heap, put it in a zone and ship it. We have distinct zones that have different policies that are clearly stated in front, up front, and it's open, out in the public for everyone to see how what we put in there, what kind of things we think should it be in there, what kind of things that can people expect to be in there. Now, these have been formed over a long time. Obviously, we'll adjust them if there's a need for that. But I think it's important to mention that it is not just us who defines these policies. A lot of the policies themselves have been defined over a long time, working with ISPs, networks, and basically the wider internet security community, where there's always discussions going on. What kind of things are good, what kind of things are bad, and from those things, best practices come out, and those best practices lead to sort of it starts out often as a discussion point, and in the end it becomes sort of a best practice, either formalized through an RFC or maybe like a more of an industry work group type thing, like a document that, for example, Mark would publish. But these things all influence what kind of policies we build around our data sets. And I think one of the unique parts of what we do at Spamhaus is that we actually work with the wider community to inform the policies and to distill that kind of thing that the wider internet community would like to see in a data set. We distill that down into our data sets. And the best example of that would be our PBL, the policy block list, because the data in there, the PBL publishes IP ranges of end user connection, end user devices that shouldn't directly send email to a mail server. Usually you would expect those kind of IPs to, if they would send mail, they would connect to a mail server of their either their connectivity provider or maybe their email provider, and the mail would from there on go out onto the internet. Now, the contents of the PBL are uniquely for us, they come from two sources. It's not just us saying, okay, we think that this range is, shouldn't directly send mail. It's also actually the network owners themselves. Every network owner can go in, create an account, and define their own ranges, saying, okay, these are ranges that we, the network owner, think that should not send email directly onto the internet. And these are other parts of the network where we would expect that kind of behavior. So it's sort of, you can sort of see it as a sort of an outsourced port 25 blocking. And we've been doing this for I think for over a decade right now, and we still get new people adding their ranges almost every day. So the part of which parts of the data are managed by us and by the ISP, that's always still growing. And in the end, we always say, there's if the network owner themselves tell you, you shouldn't really receive mail or expect mail from this range, then yeah, who better to know than the actual network owner themselves? So that's a really powerful way of expressing, do not accept any mail that's coming from here, because we think that this range is not. Those are dynamic devices or end users that shouldn't directly send mail, anything like that, mobile, 3G, 4G, 5G, dynamic DSL, cable modems, anything like that. Anything that's not meant for hosting actual mail servers. So that's the PBL is really a good example of how we work with the community and where the community can use our platform and our tools to define their own policies, to publish their own ranges that shouldn't send mail. They're able to attach their own messages to it, possibly for linking to customer support pages or anything like that. And so that is really a great way for the community to use our data as a platform to publish their own data through us. But that's not the only IP data set that we have. We have many more, and for that I'll hand it back to Skull.
Thank you. And just to make you sad and feel old, I will actually checked, and the PBL has been in that shape for more or less 15 years by now. And as Carol said, yes, I know, I'm older than you. Yes, as Carol said, the PBL is by far not the only one. Actually, it's not even the first of the list that Spamhaus started building. The first one was, and the original one was actually the Spamhaus block list, so-called SBL. The SBL was thought to be an entirely manually curated list. And by manually curated, I mean that there was originally absolutely no automation involved into creating a listing there. It was and still partly is entirely under the responsibility of a team of editors to decide what goes into the list. That list that is useful. for a number of reasons. The first one is that the SBL is capable of listing networks of different sizes because of different reasons. So for example, if an entire /24 is seen as a source of issues, for example, something that happened very recently, we see that somebody is hijacking unused net blocks at the BGP level, and you don't need to follow me if this is all buzzwords for you, but what the SBL editors can do is just list the entire network instead of example trying to run after the single source of abuse contained into what is clearly an abusive network per se. The second advantage is that when a problem is identified and an SBL entry is created, what the SBL does is send a notification to the network owner of that net block, telling them that a listing has been created and providing them the information that we collected about the reason for the listing. And as such, it is very useful as a general purpose tool to address problems that are observed on the internet, because that is just the start of a process that identifies the issues, block the issues for the Spamhaus users. It also starts the interaction with the network owner in order to remediate the issue that was identified. And that is why, even though it is still manually created, the SBL is still a valuable tool to Spamhaus. However, the fact that it is manually created means that its reaction time for some types of abuses is, of course, far from being optimal. And that is why many years ago, an automated component was added to it. The name of the component is CSS. And again, let's not go into the meaning of the acronym. It's not really relevant. But the main point about the CSS is that it is published as a part of the SBL, even though it is distinguishable from a normal, so to say, manual SBL listings, because again, of the numeric return code that lookup provides. The CSS will only list IPv4 addresses as a single address, meaning it will never list something bigger than an IPv4 or a /32 for IPv4, and the same applies for IPv6 with a granularity of /64. It is dedicated to SMTP emitters only, meaning that no matter what, something that does not emit anything on the SMTP protocol, and I mean port 25, is never going to enter the CSS. And that is the first list. The second list that we have is actually the XBL. The XBL stands for Exploit Blocklist, because as a matter of fact, and for many, many years now, a huge amount of mail spam, of Trojans and other, even just normal spam, so to say, is being emitted by machines that are actually compromised and are sending out spam without their user knowing that. This is similar. This also provides you an indication of why the PBL is valuable. That is, what would happen is that if a personal computer of somebody, an end user device, as we call it, starts sending spam, well, there is a high chance that it's doing so from an IP that is in a neighborhood that does not contain any mail server, because it is consumer and user IP space, not server IP space. So the intersection between XBL and PBL is very large. That is also what makes the PBL valuable, because you know beforehand that the nature of a certain IP is again, end user IP space, meaning that you do not need to observe an indicator of compromise that is what would make the IP enter the XBL before deciding that you're going to block it. The PBL is going to tell you that it is that type of IP neighborhood in any case, so you can use the PBL output, the information provided by the PBL to take a decision, even in the case the XBL knows nothing about that specific IP. And finally, and that concludes the number of IP-based zones / lists / data sets that we provide, is OauthBL. OauthBL is literally a subset of the XBL, meaning that it only lists IPs that are observed hosting a bot or other type of compromise. And that type of compromise or bot is known to take advantage of stolen or brute forced credentials. The reason for that is that this allows you to use the OauthBL for other things that are not SMTP receiving connection, MX connections. You can use that, for example, as part of your intelligence to identify whether an MSA connection, an SMTP authenticated connection, is coming from an IP that is suspicious. But it can also be used in a deep header parsing in order to identify whether the original injection point of the email was actually one of these bots that do abuse third parties, mailboxes, and SMTP connections. And in the end, the entire idea about having different zones with different policies and different aspects is that they do mean different things, and as such, they should be used in different manners. One size doesn't fit all. Understanding how to use them in the proper way is also part of the reason why we're having this very webinar. And I suggest you read our other publications on this matter, because we did a few blog posts on the matter that are probably interesting for you if you are trying to understand how to use our data. And yeah, Sarah will probably provide you the links for it at the end of this. In addition to this, we also have other types of block lists. So let's speak for a moment, for example, about the domain block list, the DBL. Carl.
Thanks, Joel. Yeah, so as you may remember from the earlier slide about what kind of things you can put in a DNSBL, there's IPs, but we can also put domains in there. And obviously, if you look at the anatomy of an email, doing anything with domain names or host names mentioned in that email is a very powerful way of looking at email and finding out which ones are problematic. As a way to get past existing filters, spammers always need to rely on getting their own domain names and usually getting an endless stream of new domain names. So you can expect to see a lot of churn there, and that's actually almost to your advantage, because when you start looking at the domain reputation specifically, there's sort of, before you can use a domain name, it needs to be bought first. It needs to be live in the zone for whatever the TLD is, which means that if you can figure out that this domain exists and know about it before and figure out that it's bad before the actual email is being sent, then you have a chance to have this domain in your data set and have it be available for users to query. And with having that, they can, from the very first spam they get with that domain name in there, they can protect themselves against any mails with those domain names. So the domain names that we usually put in there are what we usually refer to as full fraudulent domain names. So they're bought by spammers and cyber criminals, any sorts of miscreants of any type. They buy the domain names directly themselves. They only get used for bad things ever, and usually the moment they expire or about to expire, they don't get renewed. They just drop off and never to be seen again. But those are not all bad domain names that are around as a result of usually CMS compromises or stolen credentials for control panels or FTP servers or even registrar accounts. There's also a subset of domain names that are being used for bad purpose that are actually not bad themselves, as in owned by bad operators. They are owned by legitimate businesses, people, whatever, but they've lost control over either the website or the domain name itself. And bad people have taken over the use of the domain name to use that domain name for any sort of nefarious purposes. If you're lucky, it's just being spammed. Sometimes they'll put malware up on it. They might use it for botnet command and control. Tons of different things are being observed. But as per the policy parts that we discussed earlier, we distinguish these domain names in the response that we give. So if you look up at the domain name and we say, okay, we think this is bad, but the domain name itself is legitimate, it's just being abused by a third party, then we will differ in the response that to any questions regarding that domain name. So domain, looking at domains is a very powerful way of dealing with mail. And usually when you talk about looking at domains inside email, people think about the domain names in the body of the email, like the link that you click on. If you have like a phishing mail that says, hey, you need to change your password, click here to do that, then that's sort of the domain that you think about. However, if you look at an email, the anatomy of an email, if you look at the header part, there's plenty of options there where domain names get mentioned too. There's the reverse DNS of a sending IP if it has it. There is the hello, there's the from domain, there's DKIM headers that might contain, that have a domain name in there. So there's lots of opportunities inside an email where you can say, okay, if there's a domain name or host name being mentioned, I'm going to look at that and see what is known about it. If this is a known bad domain name, and as a result, that that reputational query can reflect on what you're going to do with the full email. Now I mentioned the fact that a lot of bad people keep cycling through domain names because the domains get blocked, so they will need new ones. And as a result, there's plenty of research that supports this. There's a lot of usually there are a lot of issues with domain names that are really new, especially if you see them in email, which brings us to another domain data set that we have, which is the ZRD, Zero Reputation Domains list. These are domains that we have first observed in the past 24 hours. And if you see them in email, then there's a really, really good chance that these emails are a problem. Any legitimate mailer will never use such a new domain name to start a legitimate mailing campaign or use that as their infrastructure domain for their mail service or their web server or anything like that. Just the fact that it's new by itself, that you've never seen it before, and suddenly you see this in email traffic is a big red flag. So this data set, the newly observed domains, the zero reputation domains, the name says it all, they don't have a reputation because they're too new, is a way for you to leverage that fact that these new domain names are often problematic, and to leverage that insight into your mail server and either block or do whatever you want to do with any emails that contain such domains. Now, there's one little caveat, is that if you do this on a large enough scale, you will get emails from your customers, from the people who you run the mail service for, maybe with domain names that they bought new. So you'll get a confirmation email from the registrar saying, hey, congratulations on buying example.com. Probably shouldn't apply this to the body message, but anything other than that, reverse DNS, hellos, froms, whatever, those are fair game for this. And this is a really powerful way of dealing with the ever ongoing churn in domain space. Now, if you remember in the DNSBL slide that we had early on, there was a third category of data that we publish in our DNSBLs, and I will hand it over back to Skull to talk about that.
Yep. That is the HBL. But before we venture into describing what it is and what it does, let me point out one thing that at this point should more or less be clear about our approach to things. In the end, what you want to do is identify something inside the message and try to use it as a hook to identify, to apply a reputation to the message itself. Now, a very easy and traditional way to do it is, of course, looking at where the message is coming from, and that is what the IP lists do. The second one is identifying anything that is a domain or a host name inside the message, in the body, in the envelope component of the message exchange, and again use that to derive a reputation and merge that reputation with what we already got from the IP side. But that doesn't mean that these two are the only options to attach a reputation to. And that is where the HashBL comes into play. As we said earlier, anything that is small enough to fit a DNS query can be queried to DNS. This should be quite straightforward. IP is an example, host names is another example. But if you take something that has its own structure and you hash it, and by hash it, I mean cryptographic hashes type of things, you get a string of a fixed length, and that string can be transported, most likely, over DNS, and therefore you can query about that. And the nature of cryptographic hashes is that the collision chance is extremely low, meaning that if you are hashing, for example, an email address, what you are getting is a string that identifies more or less univocally that very email address. And that is why we started doing this. And we're not the only ones doing this. People have been using hashes over DNS for a long, long time at this point. The HBL is just our implementation of this concept. We do publish 3 containers inside the HBL, at least right now. Of course, this is modular, so we can add a 4th or a 5th one at any time as we see need. The first one is the email address component. That is intended to target very specific types of spam, and something that if you're here in this webinar, you're probably used to see around, like the 419 or similar scams. 419 are the so-called Nigerian scammer type of emails, in which they basically invite you to contact me at this address in order to receive $1 gazillion and stuff like that. The main point about those messages is that the sender can change very randomly, mostly because they often use compromised mailboxes owned by third parties in order to operate. But what you're going to see in those messages is that they always provide a way to contact back an address that is controlled by the scammer. It can be in the reply to header, it can be inside the body, it can be both. But that information per se is yet another hook to try to derive a reputation for the message. So what we do is identify all these email addresses, hash them, and add them to this list so that you can basically do the same, identify addresses, hash them, and query the list for that very hash to see if we have seen that before. The second thing is yet again something that you probably know by now, that is all the amount of extortion spam that claims to have taken a recording of you doing naughty stuff in front of your computer and stuff like that. Those messages are kind of similar in concept, meaning that they're trying to scam you into paying an amount of money to the scammer in order for this stuff not to be republished. Again, that crypto wallet address inside the message is something that you can attach a reputation to. They don't change that often. A single campaign that can be composed of literally billions of messages contains just a handful of crypto wallet addresses throughout the entire campaign. So again, when we identify one, we hash it and publish it so that you can consume that very list in order to filter out that stuff. And finally, we do the same for malware attachment. Malspam campaigns often send out binaries or other type of attachments to infect people. The ones that we identify in our platform get added to a list that is intended to allow you get a better protection. It must be clear that it is not a replacement. It should never be considered a replacement for an antivirus. But it can help, particularly because of our capacity of publishing stuff at a very high speed. And by high speed, I mean that from the time we receive and identify something as nefarious to the time that it takes for us to publish it over the DNS, only a few seconds pass. And that means that we can be more timely in providing this information that than other means can do. And that's about it. This is about what we do with our lists. Then, of course, understanding how to use them is another thing, and how to use them in the proper way may be yet another. Carl.
Yeah, so as we said before, what we really do is we publish the data sets that answer a question about the reputation of in this case we have IP addresses, we have domains, we have hashes. So what happens if you use this in a mail server environment is you would ask us, say, hey, Spamhaus, what do you think about this IP? And we will give you a return code saying, okay, we think it is this or that or that. Obviously, what you then do with that is really depends on how you configure the use of the data locally. We built our data with the idea that it should be safe enough to reject on just the fact that it's listed. So you issue a rejection in line, and the sender gets a appropriate rejection code. But your environment may have a different need, or you may want to do different things. So there's a lot of options really available to you as the mail server user, as the data user, to implement the data and in the way that you see fit best for your particular environment. Another way that you could do is you accept the mail and then apply the data after the fact and score it. Another way you may use the data is to issue a try again later, sort of the gray listing approach. So there's really lots of different possibilities here, and it really depends on your local capabilities and really in the end your local policies of what kind of things do you want to accept and what do you not want to accept. So to make that a little bit more graphical, a little bit more insight in how such a flow would work, we made this this flow chart, which Sko will explain.
Yeah, basically it should be more or less clear by now. You just receive something, you can first of all see where the message is coming from. So you get an IP, you get possibly even more than one, but usually the connection IP that is connecting to you. That also brings with it a number of additional host names. For example, the reverse DNS of that very IP is one. The hello string it provides when connecting is another. Then the SMTP communication actually starts. And you get a third domain that is the sender domain. And at that point, you don't have a message yet in your hand. You just have a number of information that identify the connection itself. So what you can do at this very stage is already start querying some of our data sets about what you have in your hands. You that may be enough for you to take a decision at that point, at which point you are able to just say, well, I'm not going to receive this no matter what it is, and reject the message, reject the connection as at the SMTP level even before receiving the actual message. Or you can decide, and again, this is up to you, you can decide to go ahead, allow the sender to send you the message content, and at that point you can do yet another run of analysis using your content scanners, your content filtering solution. Again, that can involve extracting additional components of the email. For example, the tokens that we just said about the HBL are one thing, but any other host name or domain that is inside the message body, you can use these tokens to perform additional queries against our datasets, and of course any other dataset that you feel like using. And at that point, make your decision. That can be, again, reject the message entirely, or decide to tag it, deliver it to a junk folder, or do anything else you want to do with it. Again, how to do and what to do is entirely up to you. To you as a postmaster usually, but it could even be at the user level if you give them that possibility. And that's all from me, I guess.
Thank you. In fact, thank you both. That was great. I'm going to go on to the question and answer part of this now. We've already got 3 or 4 questions lined up. So we have from Brian, what are the easiest things to identify in SMTP connections that are abusive?
Shall I take it?
That'd be great. Thank you, Carol.
All right. No, I mean, if you look at the connections, it's themselves. There's things you can see, you know, about the connection itself and behavior you can see towards you locally. So one thing that often happens, you know, starting with the local part, one thing that often happens with the senders that are you know of low reputation is that they will try to send to addresses that don't exist quite a lot. So if you have the capability, one thing you could do, and this is, you know, I think this was pioneered at AOL like a really long time ago, is look at the ratio of how many addresses that somebody tries to mail to that don't exist versus the one that do exist. So that's the really behavioral type of thing, but that's only something you can measure locally, obviously. Now, if you look more at the connection type of thing, I would say the first thing that I would look at is you know, whenever an IP connects to you to send mail in the really early stage, even before they are sending mail, you can look at what the reverse DNS is, and you can do a lookup against our domain data set, saying, hey, if it's in there, any domain that or any IP that has a reverse DNS that is listed in our data sets, yeah, that's probably something you shouldn't accept the mail from. But I think that's sort of the easiest thing to do without having to look at any of the rest of the transaction. Basically, if you don't like the reverse DNS, or if there's no reverse DNS at all, then you're done.
Thanks for that, Carol. Okay, and then so Skull around slide 8 was talking about the 3 million domains per day which are assessed, but I actually think, Carol, you might pick up this given the fact it's around the domains. The question is, are those domains candidate malicious domains, or does this include domains which are very likely benign? Do you ever check domains such as google.com, for instance?
Yes, we do. So when we started with the domain reputation data set, we decided that at least, you know, not very early on, but relatively early on, we decided, you know what, we should probably build a reputation on every domain and not just limit ourselves to looking at domains that are mentioned in email or that hit spam traps or whatsoever. So if you look at a domain, the most obvious thing to do next is to look at the name server of the domain, which is usually a different domain than the domain itself. So in case of Google, it would be actually also be google.com. But for example, I don't know, most domains use a different domain on their name servers than the actual domain that you're looking at. And as you start looking at more and more domains, you gather this enormous pile of domain names. And I always like to say that we're greedy about getting domains. I don't really care where. Obviously, the context of where you see a domain can be helpful, but if I want to get the reputation of almost every domain. I mean, since the domain space is always in flux, you will never know everything. Every second there will be new domains and old domains will go away. But the more you can get your hands on, the better a picture you can get of what domains exist and where they're hosted and how they interact with each other. So yeah, we definitely assess good domains. And the trick is that a little bit of the secret sauce here is that you shouldn't reassess certain domains every day or every hour or every minute or whatever your schedule is. If it's good and if it's been good for a long time, you probably don't need to check if it's still good like a second later. So, but other than that, yeah, short answer is we definitely recheck good domains as well.
Okay, thank you for that. And just while we're on that domain subject, another one, but around zero reputation domains. So a question around what's the size of this data set and how many of those domains are checked on average every day, i.e. do you take a proactive approach where you classify almost all new domains, or do you only check domains when you observe some activity from them? And that's just in regards to ZRD, zero reputation domains.
Right. Okay. I'll take this one too, but the next one needs to be Pascal. Otherwise, he will get no chance for answering question. So the domains that go into ZRD, there was only one criterion, is that we haven't seen them before. We didn't know they existed. So the moment we learned that a domain exists that we didn't know about, it is new and therefore it'll be in the ZRD. There's like the name says, zero reputation. We don't give any assessment on if the domains are good or bad. It's just the fact that they are new, and that makes them be in that data set. And that is basically the leverage that we give you as a user of the data set, is to say, okay, if a domain that you're looking at exists in that data set, then it's new. We haven't seen it before. And yeah, that is it. There's no, I would say the majority of the domains that exist in ZRD are actually legitimate. They are created by perfectly normal end users or companies or whatever, but they're new and they shouldn't be sending mail, and most of them don't, but yeah.
Okay, thank you. So I'll point this one to Skull so he gets a chance to respond. So
actually, if you allow me, I'm going to add an additional data point, because
excellent.
The question was actually also about the size of the data set.
Yes, it was.
And of course, that fluctuates a lot over time because it depends on when some domains are getting registered. So for example, if you looked at back when this entire pandemic started, you could see an enormous spike of domains being registered with COVID in the name. And that increased the number of domains that were going to be processed on a daily basis. But in the end, the normal size hovers at about 300,000 domains. Again, the size of the ZRD is by policy the last 24 hours of newly observed domains. So that means that it is self-limiting, meaning that no more than a number of new domains can appear every day, hopefully. And that is the reason why in the end it's relatively small. And now go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Right, we have a registry on with us today, and sometimes they get listed on the bad TLD list on the Spamhaus projects website. Now, when they notice that they're on an RBL that they subscribe to, including Spamhaus, they put all the reported names on server hold. However, this doesn't remove the domain names from the block list within a reasonable amount of time. So their question to us is, what's a way to reduce the time of being listed on the bad TLD list?
The bad TLD, oh, you want to take it?
I'd say you take it. It's more your field than mine.
Okay, so the bad TLD list by the one that's on the website by definition looks over a little bit of a longer period of time. It doesn't just look at what's happening today and yesterday. I think it covers, out of my head, but I'm not 100% sure, over 3 weeks at time. But we are actually we have a special program. So I don't know which one the registry is and if they're already talking to us or not, but we have special data sets for registries, registrars, where they get their own domains under their TLD or under their tag fed to them. And I believe that, I'm not sure if it's ready yet, but we also have a feedback API where they can tell us, saying, hey, we took action on this, and by that they can remove the domains from our data sets, which will mean that in the end the statistics will go down faster.
Okay, great. Steiner, if you would like, if you are part of that already, or if you'd like more information, please just let me know through chat, and we'll ensure you get some more information around that. One last question. I know we're overrunning slightly, so please, if you need to leave, please feel free to, obviously. But we had one last question, and that was, is any of the querying of block lists you've mentioned today different for emails executed via API versus SMTP?
I hope I get the question right. And the answer would be no, meaning that the API provide exactly the same data as you would get from another type of query, for example, DNS. Of course, the type of information that you can provide through, say, an HTTP API is different in how rich it can be. And that is mostly about the amount of bandwidth you have available inside the DNS protocol to provide an answer.
Excellent. I hope, Jonathan, that has answered your question. Okay, we have just a couple more. What are the main challenges of reputation-based blacklists with IPv6 addresses, and how are we going to approach this matter?
I can pick this one too. I would say that the biggest challenge is the fact that from what we observe, of course, there is not too much going on in IPv6 that involves email. And that has a lot to do with the fact that not many receivers do publish IPv6 MXs. So the amount of the corpus of traffic to build reputation upon is kind of limited in some way. And also those who publish MXs over IPv6 tend to be big entities that are particularly targeted by some specific campaigns. And as a result of that, if you build up a reputation about that very corpus, you're going to end up with something that is going to be really helpful only to those who receive the traffic, that is not the internet at large. And that can easily reflect in the size of the lists for IPv6 data that we publish. I mean, the difference in size between what goes on over IPv6 and what goes on in IPv4 is staggering, mostly because of that.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. I think we have just about come to the end now. We will be sharing with everybody the recording of this webinar. So if you missed a bit or want to recap, etc., that will be shared with you. We'll also be looking in the new year to run a deeper dive. So if there are some of you who are running your own email infrastructure and you'd really like to know how to get the best out of DNSBLs, we'll be taking a much deeper technical dive to look at what advantages there are to applying block lists to certain parts of the email transaction. For now, thank you, everybody. I hope you have a great rest of your Thursday, and we look forward to connecting in the near future. Thanks all. Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.